talking about shooting the shit and kicking it, let's kick it off by talking about Jake Paul signing with the PFL, making a big deal out of almost kind of like out of nowhere. I think it's a couple-year deal. You want to talk a little more about what's going on with Jake and the deal that he signed with the PFL, one of the big competitors with the UFC.
Yeah, I think this is huge. And honestly, I think a Jake Paul co-signing goes a long way. I think a lot of people, right, like when they hear the name Jake Paul in the world of combat sports, it still kind of brings forth a lot of doubt, right?
They're not taking him real a lot of the times, I think, and he's come out and had some good performances in boxing, right? So this is a little bit different signing to MMA, right? It's not quite the same sport per se, but he's shown that he can compete at a high level in boxing. He's done it against some high level people. Whether or not you want to question the fights against Tyron Woodley, and I mean he also fought Anderson Silva too, and I mean he's shown that he is an athlete world class. I mean, I don't know how much more people can doubt him. I don't know how the transition to MMA will go, but I don't think he's supposed to fight right away. I think he's waiting till 2024 maybe to start fighting, but still this is big news at the beginning of 2023, is it not?
Definitely. I mean, probably one of the biggest headlines in combat sports today. It's just crazy. A lot of people don't want to give him his respect. He continuously comes out, shows out, and he also proves that there's money signs behind his name. So, I honestly think not only is this huge for Jake Paul himself, but it's huge for the PFL. PFL is still one of those
Absolutely.
UFC, right? So a Jake Paul cosign goes a long way. It means he believes in the system, he believes in what they're already doing, and he just wants to expand. I think I read something like it's gonna be its own little super fight league. So if anybody wants to take part in this super fight league that Jake Paul has put together in the PFL, not only will they be able to fight for the PFL, but they'll be able to make, I believe it's 50% of the pay-per-view sales the fight generates. So that's huge. I mean, not only is that putting more money into fighters' pockets, but we already know the PFL is it's like a cheat code to become a millionaire. If you're anyone in MMA in the top 15 of the UFC, like why are you not considering the switch? This is insane.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the $1 million check at the end of the year. But I remember you talking about having the fighters get some percentage of their purse, 50% or whatever it is for pay-per-view buys. This just goes to show that he doesn't just talk the talk, he's actually walking the walk. He's called out the UFC a number of times for fighter pay and whatnot. And, now he's putting together his own kind of promotion and having that kind of pay structure set up. So, I mean, tip of the hat to both the Paul brothers, but Jake has really been an advocate for fighter pay and trying to find ways to get people paid more and showing that maybe the traditional route is not always the best way to go. It's not always the highest pay. So again, I give credit to him for. I mean, he's definitely taken his platform from YouTube and blogging and whatever else you want to talk about, from social media to professional sports. He's shown a way to get there, and he backs up everything he says by doing it.
Agreed. I mean, it's crazy, and yeah, we're gonna have to wait a whole year for it, but I kind of like that because I think it's gonna give him time to transition. And I don't necessarily know his background per se. I don't know if he followed like the exact same steps as his brother Logan, but if I'm not mistaken, Logan was a wrestler. So I don't think he's coming into this blind. I mean, it is mixed martial arts, so he's going to have the stand up just fine. I think the big story is going to be, can he stuff the takedowns? Can he hang with the ground, like on the ground with whoever they put up in front of him? I'm gonna go ahead and say yes because if history serves us correct, like he's not just gonna sign the dotted line for anyone. He's gonna sign the dotted line against somebody who's gonna match up well with him, especially this first go around. So I'm excited for this. I don't know who they're going to put him up against, but I know we have a whole year until we get to see his debut in MMA. I'm assuming he's going to take some boxing matches in between that time. I want to say he'll probably fight Tommy Fury. Who knows? Nate Diaz is out there as well. So I think the next couple of years, it's going to be huge for the Paul brothers. I mean,
And I'm looking at this here. He's only 25 right now,
He's
so
so
he's not even that old. And I MMA is a different beast. It's different when you have elbows and knees and ground and pound and all that flying around. But he, like you said, he's got a whole year to train and kind of grow and learn and kind of prep for it. And they're not going to just feed him to the wolves. This is PFL. I think they're a little bit smarter. They're going to try and use the name and
hopefully.
build and set him up with somebody that they can continue to build his stardom with. Why wouldn't you?
I agree, but we also have to take into account what happened before he signed. What happened to Claressa Shields, right? Like
Right.
we want to hope that they're gonna give him a first solid matchup, and I think just like I said, if history serves us well, he's gonna sign the dotted line against somebody that he's confident against. But we've also seen the Claressa Shields experiment come to a surprising halt, or maybe not so much a halt, but a roadblock. Right? She did suffer her first defeat in MMA. They didn't have to put her up against this Abigail, who was solid on the ground. Right? She exposed Claressa Shields' weaknesses. Like, let's hope that's not the case with Jake Paul. Let's hope that this experiment goes right. We've seen this fail so many times in combat sports, with the UFC as well as CM Punk. But Jake Paul's a little different. I mean, I guess you can argue the same for Claressa. Claressa was an Olympic boxer, so who knows? We might see the first loss in Jake Paul's combat sports career, but nonetheless, I am excited. I know he recently posted something on his social media announcing this. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at that, see what he has to say, and see if he gives us any details or his take on it. I'm sure he's trolling Dana. I mean, this man lives to troll Dana. So I don't know if you've seen this video, but I have not.
No, I don't believe it. Pull it up and let's see.
As an MMA fighter to the fastest growing sports league in the world. The PFL, baby. Let's go! This league is absolutely the most fucking lit thing in the world! I will be the head of fighter advocacy. As you guys know, I've been trying to increase fighter pay for all fighters worldwide. I'm so dedicated to this that I offered Nate Diaz a two-fight deal. First, we box. Then 6 months later, we fight MMA in the PFL Smart Cage. Let's make it happen. Our goal is simple, and that's to make PFL the biggest MMA organization in the world, and we're about to change the fucking game, baby. Dana?
Jake?
Dana?
Jake?
Yeah!
Fucking funny, yo.
Oh, I love it. He calls him out at the end there. That was hilarious. Dana, Jake.
That's like their thing. That's it. That's been their thing. Yo, there's what here. Listen, I used to be one of those people who didn't believe in the Paul brothers. I used to just scoff at the fact that they were in combat sports. At this point, like, if y'all don't like this kid and Logan, like, y'all just haters. They are the biggest trolls in MMA. They are backing it up. They are entertaining. My jaw was dropped watching that video. I love him. I love him. I'm gonna say it. I love him.
No, it was great, and that's kind of what we were talking about before. He talks about he's a fighter pay advocate, and he was still just found a way to troll even in the serious moment there. I mean, he's gold is everything that he touches. It just the Paul brothers, like you were saying, I don't know how they've done it, but they have found a way to make everything that they do relevant and at the highest level, and they continue to impress, and they're going to bring in a whole new viewership to the PFL, and it might rival the UFC. I don't know exactly how big their following is compared to the UFC, but I can imagine that the PFL will be a real competitor this year for them.
Oh, 100%. I mean, let's talk about it, right? Like, as the years continue to go on post pandemic, the UFC, sure, right? They're the top dog. But if you're not talking about the PFL, if you're not talking about Bellator, if you're not talking about promotions like Ryzen, like you're really a casual. Like at this point,
There's so much healthy competition in all these different promotions, and
so much.
you know, I don't want to try to steal your thunder a little bit, but I mean, even this crossover event that they had on New Year's, with Bellator and Ryzen on New Year's Eve was awesome. But there's so much, I don't want to say equality in across the promotions, because it still is kind of viewed as the UFC's the top dog, but there's a lot of competition and a lot of good promotion out there. And you know, I love to see it. I really do. You have people going to different promotions. You talk about Shane Burgos as one of the more recent guys to go from the UFC to the PFL too. I mean, they just continue to have a different depth of talent in different promotions, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, no, it's crazy to think, because the UFC, I mean, the UFC has been on the top for so long, and not to say that they're not on the top still. They're definitely still on the top. I think what's definitely interesting is that these promotions, maybe they're not as mainstream as the UFC, but
they're gaining it.
oh,
they're gaining the following.
They're gaining it, and listen,
and they should.
Even if the casual fan, tunes in, or maybe doesn't even understand or hasn't heard of the PFL or Bellator, maybe they don't watch it as frequently, maybe they only tune into like the big cards. It is absolutely crazy to see how far those small promotions have come, and even if the casual fan hasn't seen it, the fighters most certainly feel it, right? They are able to make actual money, make this a full-time living, and they don't have to be in the UFC. That's huge. And to think that you can do this without being a mainstream name like Nate Diaz, right? Like, you can do this as a 4-0, 5-0 fighter on the regional scene. You're actually making more money than an entry-level contract in the UFC. That's huge. And who's to say what's going to happen in 5 years' time, right?
And with the PFL specifically, like, to not keep going back and forth with that, but to have your fights on ESPN and ESPN2. I know that ESPN has a deal with both the PFL and the UFC, but the UFC still has their cards on ESPN Plus, a lot of their undercards, and they don't have as many on ESPN or ESPN2. The PFL is consistently put on ESPN2 or ESPN, and then have the main card on ESPN Plus, or do the pay-per-view that they did this year for their championship fight. Can you imagine watching fights growing up on ESPN and being a young kid watching, that's what I want to do. I want to be in the PFL because you watched it on ESPN. Imagine that growing up as a kid in today's world.
And being able to become a millionaire in a sport that you felt was dominated by the UFC. I honestly think at this point in the game, if you are UFC or bust, it is simply because you believe in your mind that the top fighters are in the UFC, but we are continuously proven that is not the case. And even like, to prove that point correct, right? Michael Chandler was a champion in Bellator. He was losing to certain people, and those people that he was losing to are still in Bellator. He is now making waves in the UFC. Some of the most entertaining fights, some of the best.
Oh, absolutely. He goes in to fight every time. He's an ultimate showman.
He's great to watch. Like, listen, I'm a huge fan of him, but he alone proves that point, right? Like, the UFC doesn't have the best fighters in the world. In 5 years' time, who knows where the landscape of mixed martial arts will be? Who knows what happens when Dana White retires, right? Dana White is one of those figures who is very similar to Vince McMahon in WWE, and we are currently seeing in WWE a post Vince McMahon era. Who knows when we'll see that in the UFC, but it's going to be crazy to see in the next 5 years what the sport will be. And